Welcome to episode 10 of the In Between Classes podcast. I am your host, Will Golub, joined as always by my friend Josh Schmidt. Josh, how's it going?
I'm excited. Today we're talking about a topic that I feel super underqualified, so it should be a ton of fun.
Yeah, this topic, I thought, we both had a good idea for the last topic of the season to do something that we both, I think you could say, are uncomfortable with. All season long we've talked about, paced classrooms or things that either I've researched or Josh has been doing forever. So we've talked about stuff that we're incredibly interested in, somewhat good at. So we figured might as well close the season on something that we're not so good at. Maybe we can, do a little bit of learning just by throwing some words off each other. And that's why today's topic, we are talking about effective work and personal life balance. This is, something that honestly, Josh and I both had a good conversation about. This is something that Josh and I are kind of put behind the eight ball just due to the fact the way we were raised. His mom was a teacher, my mom was a teacher, and they were both the same type of person, just working nonstop, 24/7, grading papers. Josh, I think you said your mom had like 2 or 3 jobs in the school as it was. So Josh and I are kind of predisposed. Oh my goodness, what is the word I'm trying to say here? Predisposed. I'm a math teacher, not an English teacher. We're predisposed to not be very good at this effective work and personal life balance. So I guess with that idea, Josh, again, kind of going a little bit deeper about how your mom taught and what it was like for her.
Well, and my mother is an incredible teacher and just an incredible person, and she invests just everything into every topic that she covers. So, as an educator, she just invests all of her time, all of her energy, and in her children and in her family and her students. And then when her kids started graduating, it was like she had this void. And so she decided to just pick up multiple jobs. And at one point she had 3 jobs. Just because it seems like that's who she is. And so that was my experience, growing up. And I saw how great of a teacher she was, and I wanted to be just as good. And I'm now married to someone who's just as bad as I am with maintaining this healthy work-life balance. And the truth at the end of the day is you care about your students. And it's really hard to feel mediocre. And the best way to be a good teacher is to be prepared. And I think it's just hard for educators to maintain that healthy work-life balance. And so I think this podcast might be cathartic for us, to instead of talking about a topic that we're really well-versed in, let's have a discussion about something that we both need to improve and see if we can do a little bit better.
Right. And like you said you got it from your mom, seeing how your mom taught. My mom's the exact same way. And then I also grew up in the environment. My dad's a farmer, which means he's on the clock 24/7, putting in 12, 14 plus hour days and still going home worrying about his job. So it's one of those things, we were just entirely raised in the environment of here's your job. You do incredibly well at it, and it doesn't matter how much time it takes. So that being said, we figured we'd talk a little bit about, where do we lose that balance? Why is it that, some teachers are at the school till 6, 7 o'clock at night, at school on Saturdays and Sundays? And right off the top, the first thing we thought was grading. And I mean, that's such a huge part of education. So Josh, why does grading take up so much incredible time when it comes to a teacher?
Well, I really believe that the most important part of a teacher's job is effective feedback. And that usually comes in some form of temporary grading. Like for me, a lot of assignments are graded multiple times. Like they hand something in, I give them feedback, I give it to them, they do some corrections, they hand it in, we try that again. And I talk about with my kids that it's not done until it's done correctly. And that means feedback, which means that I'm grading assignments more than once. I'm grading more assignments per day on average, and because the kids have multiple choices at the same time, there's not a good way to have a clean answer key to make this more efficient as I go. I think I've heard from teachers over the course of my career that they talk about how I love teaching and I hate grading. And I'm definitely one of those teachers. At some point in my career, I'm not going to be a teacher and I'm going to miss everything except grading. It's hard, it's time consuming, it can be tedious, but it's also vastly important all the time. And it's just really, really hard to compensate for all of those things at the same time. So, like, Will, for you, like, when you start teaching, what do you think, you're going to do to try to compensate for how difficult, grading is, especially early on in your career?
The way I'm going to try and do it is, and I kind of got into a groove during my student teaching on how he taught, where it was, mostly a self-grading process. It was an assignment on Schoology where you type in a suggested answer, an acceptable answer, and then the students would, if they type it in, they'd get instant feedback. So that's why I kind of like why I'm so obsessed with the self-paced schooling process, because it does come with instant feedback for the most part if you set it up properly. So that's something I'm really going to try and implement. It's going to come down to grading just nonstop. When I was student teaching, I was either up walking around helping students with a question, or I was at my desk grading something on the computer, because if I didn't grade the assignment, the student didn't get the feedback, they couldn't move on to the next thing. So when it comes to grading, my goal is that it's something that I can try and be doing nearly all day long, so long as I'm not doing something with the kids, I guess.
I think what you're talking about there too, like, the kids need instant feedback in a self-paced classroom. Like, I've created these super impatient learners because they're so ready and anxious to move on to the next topic that there's become this joke in my classroom that a kid will hand a quiz into the hand-in bin and then walk over to me and ask me if I've graded the quiz yet. And I will be like, when did you hand it in? And they're like, oh, like 10 seconds ago. And everyone laughs and they have a big... Because that really is the environment. And the worst part is, occasionally a kid will come up and be like, hey, like, I really want to start the test, but this is the last assignment I have before I can start the test. Can you grade my quiz right now? And I'm like, oh, man. Yeah, bring it over. Let's get it done. It's hard because sometimes, like, I am that immediate feedback because it's really important and valuable that you do create these really, like, impatient learners because they're trying to, figure out the best pathway for them. It's just hard.
Right. So I guess that was one prong of where you lose balance is grading. The next prong is something that I'm experiencing right now in the summer, and something that you've been doing for years and years, and that's essentially building your classroom, building your projects, your units, and everything. So I guess personally, the way I see it is I'm trying to build everything I can over the summer. That way, during the school year, my 4 until 6 o'clock at night isn't spent on preparing for the next day. My thought is, if I can prepare everything over the summer, then my school days can be focused on grading and helping students, not preparing for the next day. What are your thoughts on building projects and units? Is that something that you do in the summer? Do you do it weekly, monthly?
So I agree with you 100% that if you can keep, especially like choice board type content, out of your week-to-week process, that's super helpful. In a perfect world, which I never reach, I would like to build most of my content in the summer, and then in the school week, I'm working on daily feedback. And then I can go home when the daily feedback is done, and then the weekend can be spent on like cleaning up content for the next week. But even then, I'm already breaking my rule of like trying to like keep most of the work in the work week. It's just very hard. But the first couple of years when I was teaching, I realized that creating videos, while it's way more efficient than lecture-based instruction, it takes so much more time outside of class. And now I'm trying to create these like higher quality videos. That takes even more time. I have to make most of those, either on a weekend or in the summer. There's just no way I have the energy to come home at night and at like 6:30 start creating a video that might take 2 hours to make. There's just no way that I can do that. But if I do it in the summer and I focus only on like video creation or big projects, then it doesn't feel so bad. It's totally more manageable. And things like that, or finding content from other good teachers. I think that's a huge thing that I'm horrible at. that would help me a ton.
Right. And again, I think it's just in the perfect world, if you set your classroom up perfectly, yeah, you can have everything prepared in the summer. That way, during the school year, your grading's done either during or slightly after school. Then you can go home. And again, that is the perfect work-life balance, which obviously hasn't been what you've reached and
Maybe
probably won't
someday.
be what I reach either. Maybe someday. And I guess one more thought on this last one, and it's something that is not for everyone, but it's something that you have done forever and something I've been doing for a while, and that's coaching and extracurricular activities. I guess as a teacher, and actually I just interviewed for a coaching job this last week, and one of the questions flat out was, you're a first year teacher, you're probably going to be spending so much time prepping for your classroom. How can you justify, or how are you going to make extra time for coaching? And I can't really remember what I said. I was just almost at a loss because, yeah, he's right. Right away when I thought about that, how am I as a first year teacher going to be able to, from December to March, give up another 20 hours a week to something?
Yeah, and I think one of the difficulties too is, and you know this, that coaching is a really different experience than teaching. And for a lot of people, it can be like a re-energizing experience, but it takes a lot of energy to kind of get ready for that process. So it's really hard because, like, in the coaching, it's super beneficial. It's really fun. It's a new way to work with those kids, but it is a lot of work. I think it's really hard to be a great teacher and a great coach at the same time. But if you can find a way to do it, it's so rewarding.
Right. And that's obviously, again, something we're trying to shoot for. May never reach that, but I guess we'll try. Someday maybe. But so I guess with that in mind, so we've talked about like how it's very difficult to create effective work-life balance. I guess the next thing we want to talk about is what are the consequences of not having that work-life balance. Something that we talked about when it came to self-paced classes is burnouts for the students. I'm doing so much work as a student, I just get exhausted and don't want to do anymore. That same thing happens to teachers. And I guess we want to talk about what happens when a teacher gets burned out from doing so much work, whether they're a first year teacher like myself, a 10-year teacher like you, or a 30-year teacher like my mom. All of us are going through that same phase where it seems like we're always complaining about being exhausted from schoolwork. So I guess with that in mind, Josh, what suffers when we get to that burnout stage?
I think the first thing that suffers is whatever like your immediate goal is always going to be pushed to the back burner. So for me, my immediate one is I always think of like this really cool, interesting project that I would like to make, and I'm like, oh, that would be super fun. And I always put them on sticky notes on my desk, and it turns out that same sticky note ends up on my desk for like 8 weeks. That it's just, you just can't find the time to start doing that when there's other more pressing matters at hand. I know it happens a lot with teachers that grading gets pushed back, and then all of a sudden you got the stack of 15 like different assignments sitting on your desk, and now you've got like 6 hours of grading to do. You can't do anything else until that's done. You also have the issue too of a lot of teachers, will do less, get less sleep, or not eat as healthy, and all of a sudden they start to get a little bit sick, and because they're sick they don't feel well, and because they don't feel well now they have less energy, and it creates this incredible snowball effect that you see just in every school, where you have these great teachers who are just wiped out, and it's hard because you don't get a break in teaching, right? Like, I took a couple sick days a few weeks ago because I just couldn't even talk anymore because I had just pushed myself to the brink, and the entire time I was at home I'm answering emails from kids, trying to like make sure they're doing the right assignments and being able to move to the right section, and I'm like, I don't even feel better at the end of the day. Because it's so hard to like find time to recover. So I think those are the big things that happens, and they all kind of interact with each other in this kind of like toxic fashion that you never seem to like feel better. What do you think? Are there other things that you think that you see suffer when you start to get wiped out?
Well, just to quickly touch on, I just am kind of making an observation of everything that you just said there. I mean, it's just the idea that the ultimate goal of the profession is to help students. And when you're helping them so much, you get run down and then you no longer are able to help. I just find it
Absolutely.
so strange. Like, is there any other I'm sure there are other professions. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but that you try and do it so well that the effort you put in that leads to you doing it worse and worse as a result of it. But I don't know. That was just something I thought of.
No, and I think honestly, though, I think
there.
you're describing like the exact problem that teachers have been having forever. Is that it's one of those jobs that a lot of your ability to do good work is out of your hands, and so you do the best that you can, and then it might honestly just straight up not work, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's frustrating. But I think that's the nature of the beast. That every teacher deals with that, and we just kind of do the best that we can with it.
Yeah, it's something you accept when you decide to go into the profession,
Absolutely.
I guess. The second major thing that we thought of that gets affected is just your home life in general. Like, if you're somebody that spends, you're at the school from 8 till 4, and then maybe you're a coach and you coach from 4 till 6, and okay, I might as well get this grading done at the school before I head home. Now suddenly you're at the school from 6 to 8, and then you get home at 8 o'clock and you're just ready to eat and go to bed. And that's just not, and especially me personally getting married here in a couple of weeks, I recognize that's not going to be fair to my wife. And, it's just home life just has to suffer as a result of somebody that is burned out and spends way too much time at the school. Is that something that you kind of agree with, see with, or have thoughts against?
Oh yeah, I think especially for coaching, my wife will joke on Saturdays that she misses me, because it's hard to find that balance. In South Dakota, it definitely was worse for me because of the extra hour in the school day and then the extra hour for coaching. Coaching was definitely more of a time commitment in the Midwest than it was in Maine. I do have a coworker that I coach with, and he jokes that his wife feels like a single parent during basketball season. Just because you want to do the best for your kids and you want to do the best for your athletes, and it takes time. The biggest investment we have for our students is time, and we show them that we care, but the day only has 24 hours in it. And so you have to make a sacrifice somewhere, and for me and my wife, we have, adoptions in our future, and that's going to take more investment from me as well. And I'm going to have to do a better job of finding out that balance. Something has to be sacrificed, and I really, I want to take the message that I got from my mother, and I never want to sacrifice family. But it's hard, because I want to be the best version of myself as an educator as well.
Right, especially, and that's something that, you said whoever it was, they feel like a single parent during the sports season. That's why I just find it almost comic. I shouldn't say comical, it's kind of sad, but you hear it every single year at the end of every sports season, at the sports awards banquet, the head coach of whether it be football, basketball, volleyball, track. I mean, the coach will get up there and the first person they'll thank is their spouse, because they recognize how difficult it is on their spouse, taking care of the kids or just being alone on when their spouse is on a 4-hour road trip to some game out in the middle of nowhere. So it's just, that is something that obviously is such a scare when it comes to getting burned out as a teacher that might not have that proper balance. But so with that in mind, we, I guess, kind of wanted to throw out some ideas on ways to try and keep that balance. And again, we might not be the best people for this topic, as we don't have that balance very well. Well, I say I haven't experienced it yet, but I'm just imagining, knowing my OCD and obsessive tendencies, I probably will have this issue. And then you admit that you have it. Oh, yeah. But I guess our last topic was ways to keep this balance. And I guess right off the top, I've heard from some teachers in the past that they just flat out create some rules that will keep that balance, and they try not to break them. And one of them, I actually heard, this wasn't actually a teacher, but it was a college buddy, that, the idea fits into the teaching realm. And it was, after a certain time of day, I just drop everything and go home. I'm done with work, and I don't care if I have a stack of papers to grade, if I have a project that's got to be done tomorrow. At a certain time, you just drop everything and move on. How realistic is that concept though?
That's actually what I've tried to do. I think any rule like that, like my number is I try really hard to not get to school before 7 and not leave after 5. And, hopefully the people who make fun of me for leaving too late aren't listening, because I do break that rule. But it's always in my mind that I'm like, okay, so like for me, like I don't want to work more than 10 hours in a day. Like that's the point where I'm not actually being productive anymore and I'm just getting frustrated. So I don't think that's a bad idea. Some other rules that I've heard that my wife has tried this year is that she only wants to do work in the school building. And so she would rather stay later but not bring work home. And that's actually, I think, been very helpful for her this year. I've also done it on my choice boards, is that I need a certain percentage of assignments need to be auto-graded. So like what you were talking about is like self-grading. Same idea, that I don't want everything to be self-graded, but I do need to make a choice board that has a certain percentage that is, so that I don't have to grade everything. And I discovered this year, I actually did one choice board that had no auto-grading options on it, and it was just because of the need of my students at that time, and it was really hard. It was absolutely exhausting. I totally underestimated, and that was for one class, that I'm like, holy cow, if I needed to grade this much every day all year, I probably would have stopped doing this 7 years ago. It's just so hard, just because the sheer number of things you're getting every day. So those are the 3 rules that I've been really trying to have. And, I think that they've been helpful for me, although I just think you can't black and white any of those. You got to find that healthy balance. Once in a while, when coaching's going on, I'm like, all right, like I'm going to stay until 6 o'clock tonight. Like I know it's an hour over and I'll try to balance that out. And I just think having some reasonable flexibility is good, but just figuring out your balance, I think, is really important. What do you think about that, Will? Are there any rules that jump out at you that you might use your first year?
I really like the idea of don't leave your work at the school building. This reminds me of my cousin he's currently a K2 principal, but he's been a principal at all different levels for the past about 15 or so years. And he and his wife flat out have a rule. He's a principal. She's, I forget, a nurse practitioner. I don't know exactly what she is, but their rule flat out is we do not talk about work at home. And his logic there was, we both have very stressful, personable jobs that, it's just you can't bring that same stress, that same mindset home with you. So the idea of not only keeping schoolwork at school, but just keeping any conversation about school at school, I think would be a good idea that I might try and play out. I guess we'll see if that works. And again, it helps, the fact that he and his wife have 2 such different jobs. You and Krista being teachers in the same school, I'm sure it's damn near impossible to not talk about school.
Yeah, and we're also just like, we really like educational theory, and so it's just something we talk about. However, we both have started to figure out, okay, so like, I'm schooled out today. Like, I really want to have this conversation, but I can't have it today. And just finding that point where I am absolutely worn down is something that's taken me a long time to figure out. And I definitely am not there yet, but I don't think you necessarily need to say, like, whatever the rule is, like, it's no school or school this time. I just think, like, having, like, that thought process is really healthy, and figuring out, like, what your point of burnout is. Because I didn't do that when I started teaching. I would go to school on Sunday at 10 o'clock. I would watch all of the football games, and I would go home at 10:30 at night. And then I would go to school, the next morning, and I was wiped out. And I just never created that line of what is my point of too much. And I think if I would have started that way, I probably would have had a healthier balance to start.
Right. And one last thought on these ways of keeping balance, and this is something I'm actually participating in this year, is South Dakota starting what they're basically calling a mentorship program. And I think it's pretty cool. Basically, me as a first-year teacher will be paired up with some veteran teacher, might be in the school district, might be somebody in a completely different district. Essentially, the thought is they want you to work with an experienced teacher. That way they can essentially just kind of pass along their thoughts on what you're doing. That way they can kind of help you keep that balance, just because I forget what the exact statistic is, but there's so many young teachers leaving the profession for so many different reasons, whether it is too much schoolwork or can't figure out how to deal with parents or this or that. And I like how South Dakota has recognized that there's an issue and they are trying to solve that issue with something, and that is this mentorship program. Was something like this ever available to you, Josh, or is this something that would interest you?
Yeah, I actually had a wonderful mentor in Salem. His name is Mark Kimmel, and he was awesome. I wouldn't have made it those first couple of years without him. And now in China, I have an incredible staff that I work with, and honestly, like, it's just, you need to rely on the people around you. You're all a team. When you're in education, like, you're all fighting the same battles every day. Like, you need to use the people around you. I love the idea of the mentorship program. It's just, hopefully the people who are mentoring are, hoping it's as beneficial as you do. Like, that's the thing that really matters. I know people have had mentors that don't feel like it's as valuable, and so it kind of dulls the effectiveness. But using the educators that you work with is so important early.
Yeah. And again, you got lucky in essence where it wasn't like the school paired you up with Mr. Kimmel. He took you under his wing, and yep, he actually cared that you did well. It's not just, and that's what I like about this mentorship program is you have to like apply to the state and say, yes, this is something I care about. I want to help young educators, which is why I'm really excited, because my goal is I'm going to be paired up with somebody who's just as excited and ambitious as I am, and then that will help in that essence.
Oh yeah, I think if it works, it's going to work amazingly well.
Right. So again, don't know if we've accomplished anything. I mean, I doubt we're going to go home and now just be incredibly balanced people, but we just wanted to talk about it, see, if there was anything we could learn from each other that would help out. So with that in mind, we wanted to go to our final closing bell. And again, with this being our last episode of the season, essentially the last episode before I become a first-year teacher next fall. I mean, I'm not sure when we're going to start this back up again, maybe September, maybe October, who knows. But since this is our last episode before that day, we thought it would be, just kind of a good idea of, this closing bell focused on tips for a first year teacher, whether it's, Josh just passing on some wisdom to me, whether it's me asking questions, we all know. Well, I guess we'll just see what these next 5 minutes comes of these next 5 minutes. So Josh, with that in mind, any tips for a first year teacher?
So when I saw this on the list, I thought just an excellent idea. And so I wrote down a few things that I was told that were super helpful to me and things that I've tried to share with other first-year teachers that I've worked with. The first one is I had a teacher in college tell me, you will never be as tired as you are 1 month into your first year of teaching. And I kind of laughed it off, and she acted like it was a big joke. But I'm not kidding. Like, the beginning of October, I one day went home at 4 o'clock. I passed out on my couch, and I woke up when my alarm was going for the next day. I was just absolutely trucked out. And it wasn't bad. It's just, it's a different kind of tired. Being emotionally and physically tired. Honestly, like, my legs and back hurt so bad from just standing all the time. I had never done that before. So it's just, you will be so tired. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just such a different experience. That was something I wish I would have believed when they told me right away.
That's kind of funny. I think back to I can't remember what class it was. It was my sophomore year. Maybe it was like some Foundations of American Education, whatever it was. I vividly remember reading through the book, and it had in bold underlined words. And I guess this is just connected because it was something back in college. Bold underlined words: do not get married the summer going into your first year of teaching. Which I am just breaking that apparent cardinal rule just because I have no idea why. Like, I'm assuming just because they don't want want you to mix the stresses of a first year of marriage with the stresses.
At least it's early, right? It's early in the summer.
So I guess I'm a little concerned that I'm already breaking one of these incredible cardinal rules, but I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens to that. So I don't know. Well, any other thoughts, or I guess what else
I got
do
a
you
couple
have on
others.
tips?
Behavior management is honestly 90% of your daily job, and good teachers are good behavior managers. It's one of those things where when you become a good behavior manager, it allows you to teach. And my first, I would say, 6 months of teaching, I was just straight up bad at this. I wanted the kids to learn like skills so much, and that's a big focus on my philosophy. I don't want to just deal with behaviors. I want them to learn like underlying skills. But the truth is, early, you just have to be consistent. And so I also, one of the things I wrote on this is, I used to get advice that said, don't smile until Christmas. And honestly, it's bad advice. Like, it's not, like, if you take it literally, it's bad advice. But the thought behind it is absolutely correct. It is so much easier to be rigid and then let off than it is to be too, like, fluffy around the edges and then try to become strict. Because it is age-appropriate behavior for kids to test your boundaries. So if you say that if you do that again, this is going to be your consequence, and they do it again, you have to follow through. You have to. If you are not consistent, it is age appropriate for the kids to test the new boundary, and that cycle will go on forever. So, like, early on, just having your rules written down, and being consistent with them. If you make in quotations, a threat, you have to follow through on that. There's no like compromise there. And then as you build those relationships with the kids, then you can start to adjust. But when they say don't smile till Christmas, what they really mean is be extremely consistent early, and that's really helpful.
Right, and that's kind of, I like what you said earlier. You can't be a good teacher until you're a good manager, and that's why, honestly, kind of my goal is the whole first week is, not even really do any teaching of math. My plan is the entire first week is just setting ground rules, building a relationship, letting everybody know here's how it's going to go in this classroom. And then after hopefully a week, everybody sees how it's going to work. And then my goal is to start teaching after that. So maybe a week is too long. Maybe it's not long enough, and you just got to try and do them both at the same time. But my goal is, establish rules in the first week and then start teaching later on after that.
No, that's a great rule. And like practice specific procedures. So like we have this little like game that we play the first couple of days where I'll give kids, I say, okay, so at 10:05, I want you to do this. And then so you can practice what happens when someone does something they're not supposed to do. And then I like react kind of over the top, to like kind of shock the kids a little bit. But like to show them like we're actually like this is actually how it's going to be. And another couple little things that'll be helpful there is, so decide what your line is. So like whatever the line that the kids cannot cross, like your non-negotiable line, you need to decide what that is before you step foot in that classroom. And I did not early. And my line kept moving, and it was super difficult to adjust back. I basically had to start over in year 2 and have a new line. And now that I've been teaching for a long time, like I know exactly what my line is, which is disrespect to peers. Like that's my line. You will absolutely never treat your classmate in a disrespectful fashion. And if you do it, you are out of my room immediately. Like, that's my non-negotiable. And I don't think every teacher needs to have the same non-negotiable, but you just need to decide what it is early and then be consistent with that. So what do you think about that, Will? Like, having, like, whatever your non-negotiable line is. Have you given that some thought before?
Not entirely, honestly. And I found myself doing what every human being does when you're dealing with people during my student teaching is you found out which students are your high achievers, good wholesome kids, and then you find out who the troublemakers are. And unfortunately I was like, oh, okay, I can be more lenient with these people. And that hard line, I agree, was shifting for me just during student teaching alone. So I agree. You got to create a line, and no matter who the student is, and again, I think that's going to be the toughest part is when you find out who the quote unquote troublemakers are and who the, high achieving, good, outstanding kids are, is being consistent across the board with that line, I think is going to be the tough part. And the other thing that always, there's, your cussing words, there's specific words just cannot be said, and you got to go over the top when they're said. But,
yep. And that's honestly, it's one of those things where for me, that's a really hard line too. And it's hard, but you just got to be consistent, and you got to be consistent with your administration too, and let them know this is the behavior, this was the consequence. And I think it's important to use consequence as a positive and negative phrase. So I tell my kids, if you do this action, you get this consequence. And they'll be like, yeah, but that's a good thing. And I'm you're right. Good actions have good consequences. That's how it's supposed to be. I don't want there to be a mystery in my room. If you do something, I want the kid to be able to predict what the consequence is going to be, positive or negative. And it's hard to know until you've just been in the room figuring that out. And that's the hardest part of first year teaching. That there's things you can't experience until it's actually your classroom.
No, I completely agree. And that's something that I'm, I guess, excited and nervous about, is those things that you cannot practice or you cannot prepare for, that you're just going to be hit with that first time. But I guess that in mind, any other one last big thoughts?
Biggest one is honestly, enjoy the job. I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching. There's nothing quite like it. And really, there's a lot of reasons to not teach, kind of, in popular culture now. But there's only one reason to be a teacher, and that's the kids. And I love my kiddos. It's not easy every day by any stretch of the imagination. But I love my kids. I'm going to miss them when summer starts up soon. And just enjoy the job. It's really fun. It's one of those where you know that you're doing something that has a societal benefit, and you get to put all of your time and energy into it and really feel good stuff come out, at the end. So have fun. You're going to be a great teacher, Will. I've known that, since you were in 8th grade. You're absolutely ready for it. You've done the work. You're going to be great.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty excited for it. And like I said, with these... Well, I guess with the wedding coming up in 2 weeks, these next 2-3 weeks will not be thinking about teaching. But come mid-July, I'm excited to start getting more prepared with everything. So I guess with that in mind, whoever's listening, all 2 of you or whoever it is, thank you for tuning in to this last episode of the first season. I guess if we're feeling real ambitious, we will hopefully be coming back for a second season. But I guess we'll see how we feel come next fall. But with that in mind, Josh, it was a great episode, great season, and have a great last week of school.
Yeah, we're almost there. Summer break's coming.
That is. So thanks again, and see you next fall.